Okay, Tim?
All right.
Will we be closer than this? Don't we seem far away?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're good.
Ready?
Sorry, God.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Father Edwards, pastor here at Mary Mother of God Parish in North Scranton. We apologize for some technical difficulties we had getting our live chat session going tonight, but that's life. There's a lot of reasons why things get complicated. I am honored to be hosting this session tonight along with two very good priest friends of mine. Father Dan Issing, at my left, your right, who is a theology professor at King's College in Wilkes-Barre, and Father John Michael Lee, a Passionist father, currently residing over at St. Anne's in West Scranton. As you know, the topic of this three-part series is we have a Pew For You. A couple weeks ago, we focused on divorced and remarried Catholics who often don't feel welcome in church. Tonight, we're focusing more specifically on the LGBTQ community, which again often does not feel welcome in the Catholic Church or perhaps any church. We cannot change what the church teaches. We do not have that power or authority. What we do have is the ability to try to explain church teaching in a way that can be more welcoming, more helpful, more friendly, more charitable to members of the LGBT community and their families. So we hope that tonight we can do that. We really hope you submit some good questions that can help us answer the questions that you have and help you understand this issue a little bit better. Father Issing, a few opening comments, please.
Yes, hello. Thank you, Father Edwards, for inviting me to be a part of this panel. As Father said, I teach at King's College. I teach moral theology, more on the area of social ethics and Catholic social teaching. And I've spent a lot of time reading Pope Francis's work on us becoming a welcoming church, a church of open doors. And so I'd like to bring some of that perspective into today's discussion. It's a real pleasure to be here with all of you.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you making time out of your busy schedule. Father John Michael Lee.
Yes, I just completed 12 years as retreat director at a large Catholic retreat house in New York City. And about 10 years ago, my community asked me to begin an outreach to LGBT persons, which we did in the retreat house. I'm now on sabbatical after a very intense period, and happened to be in Scranton when I discovered what was going to be happening tonight and offered my services. I've also been on a committee that meets in New York 4 times a year about ministry to LGBTQ persons, and have found that an extraordinarily important learning venue for me. And so I hope that I can share some wisdom from that experience.
Each of us brings something to the program tonight. I'm just the pastor of your basic average parish, but I'll throw in what I can. Please submit your questions. Those of you who are computer savvy, and I am not, will know how to do that. We have one question. These questions came into me before we even started. And Father Issing, perhaps you can begin with this. What is the official church teaching on homosexuality? Can the laity change what the church teaches if we disagree with it? And perhaps even find it to be harmful or painful?
Well, I'll talk about beginning with the hardest question on the table. But church teaching is very clear, and I would just invite people to look at the Catechism for the most direct explanation of this. It's easily accessible on the U.S. Catholic Bishops' website. And it comes under the 6th commandment. As you know, the part of the moral side of the Catechism focuses on the 10 commandments. And this falls under the 6th commandment and really under the category of vocation to chastity. And I think it's important to appreciate that chastity is not just something for celibates like ourselves. It's not just something for single people, that married couples also practice the virtue of chastity. And so what is chastity? It really is the integration of our sexuality into a life of love and holiness. And so that's the big umbrella. Actually, I think that part of the church's teaching is rather magnificent and strong in trying to challenge all of us to take seriously our sexuality and to integrate it according to the love command, right? And specifically love of God and love of neighbor. And so I think there's some very powerful matters there for us to consider. Chastity being a virtue, right? And it is a virtue of temperance, and it's about integration and generosity and love. So having said that, I think we can then talk about the specific teaching of the church. And some of this is very difficult language, it's very hard language for people to hear. But basically the church's teaching is that homosexuality is contrary to the natural law. And that's been a long-standing teaching of the church, and it has it certainly also made reference to in the scripture, and especially in the New Testament. Jesus himself speaks specifically to homosexuality, but St. Paul certainly would. And so a lot of our church teaching would begin in the Old Testament and also have some New Testament references. But I do think the church has a traditional natural law perspective on this. And so at the end of the day, the church's teaching, of course, is that sexual relations is between a man and a woman. And so that becomes the argument against gay people having sexual relationships or having a married relationship. So that's the official teaching in a nutshell. There's a lot more that sexual ethicists would want to say in relationship to that, but I think if we bracket this under the category of living the chaste life, which is living the charitable life, and then in that context to understand one's own orientation, right, sexual orientation. And so the categories, right, when people talk about the LGBTQ community, we want to remember that those are important words for members of that community, but they're people, right, who are trying to understand life and are trying to love. And as many theologians are asking us when we talk about this issue, not to objectify gay people as though they're out there, right? They're members of our community. And so what is the appropriate pastoral response, I think, is the reason we're here tonight.
And would you agree with me that perhaps we have not always been appropriate and pastoral?
Yeah, I hate to draw attention to the bad things people do, right? We all do them at certain levels, but I think this is where the American Catholic bishops a while ago now in Always Our Children were trying to draw out that idea that the dignity that everybody is a cherished child of God. And that really is the starting point here, right? And so when we think about a member of the LGBTQ community, they're members of families, they're human beings who are on a quest for happiness and holiness, just like all of us are. They need to meet Christ, just like all of us need to meet Christ, and what a wonderful thing it is when you actually meet Christ. So I would say the challenge, the invitation with the expression, there's a pew for you, is how do we give them what Pope Benedict called the look of love that people crave? Because that's at the center of our Christian life.
That's well said. Father John Michael, anything you wish to add to that? Father Dan said?
Yeah, I think we move from the teaching of the church to the practical reality of dealing with the individuals. And that's a very different reality. I experience people talking about people who are LGBTQ, other things, and making assumptions about what their lifestyle is. Now, I've met an awful lot of people over the past 10 years or so that are in some way in those categories, and I've had acquaintances and colleagues and friends over a period of 40 years who were gay, and none of them were living up to what people are judging them to be living up to in terms of doing all these awful things. Some of them are living celibate lives. Some of them are living essentially chaste lives. Many of them are working for the church and within the church in reaching out to taking care of other people's. But they tend in the popular mind to be into this bunch of people doing terrible things. And so the first place we have to start, if we're not one of them, and I'm straight, is not make judgments without knowing any facts in terms of a particular person. But we need to accept the person as the person they appear to be and walk with them as they seek to deepen Christ.
Those are those are good insights by both of my brother priests. I would hope that every gay person watching this program tonight knows that they are welcome at their parish. And if their experience has not been one of being made to feel welcome, perhaps they should find a different parish where they would get a more welcoming attitude. And as Father John Michael just said, many parishes right here in the city have gay people and perhaps employed in ministries and carry them out very well and must be loved and welcomed like everybody else. And, as I was hinting with Father Dan a few minutes ago, the term the gay person is gravely disordered is a very negative comment, and no doubt makes the gay person feel that they are not welcome. And if we attain no other goal tonight other than to make that gay person feel that they are not only welcome, but I expect them to be in church, and I hope that they can offer their gifts and talents to the community of the church. And the church will be richer, and they will be richer if they find it welcome. And if they don't find it someplace, in one Catholic church, at least in this area, there's usually another Catholic church not too far away where it can be found. So we have other questions here. Again, Father Dan, what would you say to a parent who is devoutly religious and has an adult child who is gay and feels unwelcome or doesn't know what to say to that person, to their child, who is probably an adult?
Right. This is something as a college professor, I hear a lot from students who will come to me to talk about this issue. So it's a sacred question you ask in that. I think many young people that I've spoken to over the years have felt a lack of back from their parents when they talk about when they are. And it's more, I don't think the parents are being vicious or mean. I think it's more of surprise and just genuine not knowing how to respond, right? And maybe with that, a certain kind of disappointment that their kid is this way, right? And I think it's that experience that really can hurt and sometimes even harm a gay person who is coming out to his or her parents, right? And so I'm not sure the best answer at a time like that is to quote scripture or to quote the catechism, because what the young person needs more than anything else at that moment is the assurance that things will be okay, right? That the love relationship will continue. As I keep going back to Pope Benedict's, right? Give them the look of love that, because it's something that we all need, and indeed we all want more than anything else. And the mystery of Christ is that all of us, each of us, has that capacity, right? If we ourselves are living inside that love command and living inside that Eucharistic communion that we celebrate, especially on Sunday, that this is how we transform ourselves. This is how we transform ourselves to respond to whomever comes our way, the way Jesus would, right? And that's I think that is how we be more helpful to parents, people who are who are questioning their sexual identity or their gender identity, or are actually engaged in an awareness that this is who they are, right? And so I'm not sure people need our judgment as much as they need our love, right? And I would say certainly the church could do a lot better and do a lot more in welcoming or helping parents to sit with their beloved son or daughter and accompany them. Pope Francis talks a lot about this culture of encounter, right? that, and he's talking about it in every aspect of our lives. And so I think here is one of those great opportunities for us to think about the intersection of love and truth, right? And so it's really a powerful occasion to deepen love, and we can't lose that perspective. That's what's really at stake here, right? Not judgment, but love.
That's true unconditional love. And that may be challenging for parents. I mean, I'm probably, I think I'm the oldest person in this room.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was a younger person, the LGBT community didn't even have a name that would easily identify. I mean, I know that people, at least in the city of Scranton, a more conservative area, it was not even talked about that much. And I think great progress has been made, which might make it for that parent to understand where the kid is coming from. That is a work in progress for sure, and even Mother Church has to work harder. Father John Michael, any thoughts on that for the parents of that young person, or maybe not so young person?
From the pastoral perspective, I always tell the parents that they've just discovered that their child is gay. Your first responsibility is to love them. That overrides everything else. First, you love them, and you figure out how in my love can I be present to them as they deal with this recognition that they have had about who they are and how they are, and walk with them as they begin to grow into a self-understanding and learn how to live with the truth of who they are. That's very important. I had a student in Canada about 20 years ago who his parents actually beat him up when they heard. But fortunately, the principal and a couple of teachers were very present to him and eventually got him to come to me after much time. And the first time he came in and told me who he was, I said, "What took you so long?" He says, "I thought you'd have to condemn me." I said, "No, I don't have to condemn you. Why did you want to talk to me?" He said, "I want you to tell the other gay students that God loves them." And I said, "Why do you want me to do that?" And he says, "Because otherwise they'll go to the wrong part of town and people will take advantage of them. But if you tell them that God loves them, maybe they'll avoid that and get on with their lives." That's something we're thinking about.
That's a very powerful story from your own personal experience. I suppose all priests have heard somewhat similar experience of the kid who maybe wants to talk to you about it, but is hesitant, fearful of judgment, condemnation, whatever, that perhaps they have gotten from other people. Okay.
Young people, what would your message to young people that may be gay, that they would have a future in the church? And do you ever see the church's teachings changing to allow for marriage to be for more than just a man and a woman?
Okay. And so the question was, what would we say to a young person struggling with the issue, wondering what their place in their church is? Father Dan? We could go a lot of ways with that question.
Right. Well, I think it's a fair question, and it's an honest one. That, to go back to your opening comment, we're not the people who get to make those decisions. But I will say this: one of the things that Pope Francis has been challenging us has to do with he's tried to give a perspective. The church itself needs to be evangelized right now. And one of the ways that he has talked about this, right? So if remember his goal in Evangelii, the joy of the gospel, is to reintroduce Jesus to everybody in the world, and especially within the church. And so he literally begins that pastoral constitution by inviting everybody into a renewed personal encounter with Jesus. I think that's exactly right. And so we'll proceed to talk about this missionary option, where the church needs to be open to, he says, to changing its times, its schedules, its language, many aspects of the church. And how do we do that, or why would we do that, is because we need to become a community that is allowing ourselves to be evangelized. So let's be clear on what he means. He's not saying we need to become what society is or what culture is, right? That's not a challenge or an invitation for the church to become like society. If anything, he joins Pope Benedict and John Paul II with a suspicion of modern culture in its atheism, but also in its relativism, and we could go down a couple strands there. But what he is saying is that this is a moment for the church to listen to people who fit in the categories of the poor, the vulnerable, the broken, the oppressed. And he doesn't just say, listen to them. He says, let's read the gospel with them. And that's where the evangelization happens. So he's given us a formula. I think my experience with this formula so far has been deeply challenging of my white Western world that I live in here as a priest in the church in northeastern Pennsylvania, which is where I am these days. And so I do think he's pushing us to meet Christ in places that we have perhaps forgotten that he also exists there, right? So he's really inviting us into the 25 verses 31, 46 judgment scene. So I would say that the best place, and I don't mean to be not answering the question, but I can answer the question, right? But what I can say is his invitation for us to meet these voices that have a chance to, as it were, don't get a chance to speak in the church. Us praying with them with the gospel, even outside of church, right? As it were, in their territory. That I think is a pretty radical and wonderful invitation. And it actually sounds a lot like what Jesus did. So I find that to be one of the most powerful things that Pope Francis has said. And my experience with it so far is that it is uprooting me and challenging me as a priest and as a Christian to listen to Jesus in new ways. I don't know if either of you would want to reflect on that.
Well, I think I find what the young person trying to find their place in the church. It has certainly happened to me, and I'm sure it's happened in both of your religious communities. These gentlemen are not diocesan priests. I am. A young person said, "Could I consider being a priest?" And my answer was, "Of course." That person would be expected to, except in rare circumstances, follow the celibate lifestyle that the three of us do. But that would be fine. And maybe God is calling him to do that. As far as being married, that is a much more difficult question. There are certainly people who say, why couldn't any priest just marry us civilly? Well, I don't think the bishop would allow that, but we want them to know that their love and their self-giving love may be very true and real. And we may not be able to officially recognize it, but if their love is true and genuine and they're deeply committed to each other, I would knock that and say it's not true or that's false. It may just be different than the typical love of a man and a woman. It may be hard for a young person to integrate all of that. You want to throw anything into that?
Yeah, I agree with what you two are saying. We don't start with anybody with an assumption of what they're doing in their life. Until somebody tells me that they have sinned, I don't know that they've sinned, regardless of what their situation is. So I can't start from making a presumption, whether I do it as a priest or as a religious or as a member of or a neighbor. So when somebody comes to us, we don't start with the rules and regulations. We start with finding out who they are and how they are and what they're struggling with. And then we try to walk with them at the point where they're at, not at the point where somebody thinks they ought to be arriving. And they may never arrive there. I may never arrive there. There's still things in my life I need to get straighter, okay? So when you look at Jesus, Jesus didn't always go to the people that were perfect. Matter of fact, he couldn't stand the ones that thought they were. But he would go to the ones everybody else thought was a sinner, like Zacchaeus, the guy that was up the tree. He says, come on down, I want to have supper at your house. Or like the woman at the well who had 5 husbands. He starts with her there. You've had 5, the one you're with now isn't your... Oh, you're a prophet, sir. And they start talking faith and religion. And he talks with her, and other people are shocked. And then there's the Good Samaritan, the only one who everybody rejects because he's a man of no faith or bad faith. And he's the only one that does the right thing by caring for the person. So what's Jesus want of us? No judgment. None of us has the right to judge. Even in the confessional, the penitent does the judging, confirming. They're the one that tells me what. And then I try to help them with a little bit of a supportive reflection and a penance that maybe help them to move their life forward a bit. And over time, I've watched people change their lifestyles, gay, straight, or whatever. And so we need to start by letting go of our need to decide that they're not okay and begin with their desire to be okay in whatever shape that turns out to be.
Well, that's a great answer. Any other questions, yet, Tim?
Sacraments.
Please.
LGBTQ, are they able to receive other sacraments?
Well, you want to start with that, Dan?
Of course, right? Certainly baptized, they're probably already baptized, they already received their confirmation, received penance, they've received Holy Communion. And, you know, as Father Edward said, if one were to opt for priesthood, they certainly could receive that sacrament, right? If they followed the rules that any of us had to pursue. So I guess that, you know, like the sacramental life is not excluded. They're not, you know, the sacraments are available to us. Now, we would talk about being in the state of grace to receive the sacrament of the Eucharist. So that one's an interesting one because, and I think Father kind of referenced this. It's like, who gets to decide whether I am in the state of grace to receive communion, right? And so, you know, this has become a political issue in our time, but for us as priests and certainly for the church, it's not a political issue, right? It's a human issue. And the Eucharist is meant to bring us into relationship with Christ. And so it's true, right, that we believe that there are some moral acts that separate us from communion with Christ, and therefore require of us the sacrament of reconciliation. So, I mean, I think we don't want to pretend that isn't true, right? I mean, I think there are times where we are so impure that we ought not receive.
In many different ways, not just
That's
one
correct.
particular. The sexual of my life, I may be a sinner in a million different ways.
That's correct. So, but I would say no. I mean, the sacraments are meant to bring us into relationship with Christ, right? And but I would say to distinguish the sacramental life of the church from the pastoral life of the church, which I think is an important distinction because I know some people that I have journeyed taken the walk with in the LGBTQ community, they're not really wanting to be in the sacramental life of the church because of the church's teaching, right? They don't feel like they do belong. But that doesn't mean we don't have a responsibility in terms of our pastoral care, right? And so I do think that is another place where the church could be doing more than it currently does, right? And you know, as Catholics, we are always dancing between truth and love, right? Benedict in Deus Caritas Est reminds us, you know, that love that is just purely sentimental is not biblical love, right? Biblical is transformative truth, and so we do understand that the activity of loving, obviously according to the love commandments, But we're always being challenged, all of us, straight, homosexual, heterosexual, whatever, questioning gender, where you're at, wherever in your gender journey, right? We're all trying to figure out that essential question of our lives, which is its meaning, our purpose, why God put me here. And that is a journey of love and truth together, right? I mean, all of us who are Catholic open the Bible every day to experience the love of God, but also to hear His truth and His wisdom, right? And that is, I think we want to just draw out that as we help people to discover their personal truth, right? We think it is a biblical encounter. We think that is also a meeting with Christ. Because He is the teacher, He is the Lord, right? So I would just want to put that in there too, that as we think about love, it's a truthful love that we're aiming at here, right? And I think the Bible does give us, especially the New Testament, gives us a lot of insight in that way.
Very, very much so. Certainly, I deal with, in confession, people who are committing all sorts of sins, and I don't necessarily tell them what, and we all do, don't want to tell them what they want to hear. We want to tell them what is the truth that will be life-giving. And it may be a great challenge that calls them to make a radical turnaround in their life. But because I love them, I will tell them what I believe is the truth, what the scriptures say is the truth, and walk with them and try and do it. It may not happen in one confession, and a confession may not be a short confession, but because we love them, we will try to give them what will be life-giving. And it may take a while before they can understand and experience that.
Yeah, so I mean, your point is well taken, right? Like, because you are in the parish and you're meeting people at these kind of important moments in their lives, you probably see this a little bit more than what I see in the college students, because my students are always between the ages of 18 and 25, right? So it's kind of like it's a repeat performance, as it were. But being at church, receiving the sacraments, religious education, that's all important. That's all part of it. But the other part of it is the journey of their life at work, with the people that they love, their relationships, right? And all of that is part of the whole, the big picture of the church as sacrament. And I think that's something that we sometimes forget, that that is also a place that we could be doing better mentoring and better kind of outreach to help people do the integration around chastity, right? I mean, the church is relearning what chastity means, right? Within the presbyterate, we're kind of like bringing that word back into the dialogue about sexual relationships within amongst married people. And why? Because we're living in a culture that is somewhat thoughtless about sexuality, right? And so I do think we have in our tradition some powerful and beautiful teachings about the dignity of human sexuality, that the more we listen as a church to the experience of separated and divorced Catholics, as you had a few weeks ago in this program, but also couples that are married and have, the disappointment around sexuality or sexual relations within a marriage is another fruitful conversation. But also listening to the experience of people who are questioning in terms of their sexuality, right? Or have learned that they are not, quote unquote, heterosexual, right? But that their way of loving is gay. And I think Pope Francis is right that it's not a question of are we teaching, are we going to change the teaching? I don't have that authority. But I can listen and be changed by their experience, right? And it's that radical meeting of somebody in their vulnerability and in their quest for truth, right, that the encounter happens with Christ. And that I think is something that is challenging us as church across the board. Are we actually meeting in encounters that are life-changing for people, right? And that I think is where Francis is picking up on things that, especially Pope Benedict said, to push us to become a church that's excited about Jesus, right? And is preaching this beautiful thing that Jesus brings to your life, right? He says that Francis says this in Evangelii Gaudium, that all you need to do is move an inch towards Jesus, and you're already feeling this amazing love coming at you. It's true. I mean, I've experienced it, and I've seen people experience it in my ministry. So I would just want to, I want to kind of open our sense of this conversation to a wider notion of the Christian spiritual journey, right? And then how the church can assist people very deep in the meeting of Jesus.
Any other questions, Tim?
No.
Because I also want to address, and maybe Father John Michael can help us here. I'm not sure if we're just talking to or for the person who believes themselves to be gay or lesbian, but more also to those who judge them and make it difficult for them to be welcomed, to be accepted, to be loved. And it's not uncommon for somebody to say, Father, you should go tell that gay person whatever, go anywhere you want with that. And I don't think it's anybody's business to say how you live your life. On a few occasions, I have taken the occasion to say to somebody, somebody brought it to my attention that they think that you are acting inappropriately, and they could not hear it. And I was disappointed that maybe I couldn't make it clear enough to them. But at the same time, maybe I should have said to the person, you worry about your soul, and this person maybe isn't ready to hear that just now. Maybe I could make them better instead of confronting. I don't think I was confrontational, but I'm sure they. So I hope that those people out there who are thinking judgmental about this person, that person, I would say pray for them rather than judge them, and help them rather than condemn them. They're obviously struggling on this lifelong journey to integrate their sexuality, and it's not easy for any of us. But to judge them or think people are looking at them or, they shouldn't do this or that is not helpful. It's not Christian, unless you're doing it in a way that's meant to be helpful. And I'm afraid a lot of times, and that has all sorts of political elements to it. And I think Jesus will do the judging, and he's much better at that than I am. And I think we'll all be a lot better served if we let him do that. If there's no other question, any closing comment, Father John Michael, please.
I just follow up on a couple of things that Father Dan said. It's true that we can't change the teaching of the church, but over 2,000 years, it's quite evident that the teaching of the church does grow, it does evolve, it does expand. And one of the sources or resources for that growth or expansion has been science. And the church from the Vatican right on down has been very receptive, especially in the last century or so, to the developments of understanding through science. And there's a lot of science looking at gender and all the related things. And it's giving us a more sophisticated understanding of the spectrum of sexual orientation, and that many people are on various points along this spectrum from one end to the other. The language that we use in our documents is theological, philosophical language. The same language, if it's heard as scientific language, begins to fail. And so we have to understand which language we're speaking when we use these terms. So objectively disordered, that's theological, philosophical. Science is going to tell us something different. We, our theologians in particular, and our scientists need to talk to each other across those language barriers to get better understanding on both sides. And then we may have to shift, as we did when we discovered that gravity was real. When we discovered that the sun does not rotate around the earth, we had to change some of our ways of describing things theologically. We may find, but we won't do it personally, it'll happen on a level of the hierarchy and their advisors, that we may have to find some of our understanding and language and so on. I think that's vitally important.
certainly, I'm 63 years old, and the questions seem to have changed as I've aged. That person can change. If they just try hard enough, they won't be gay anymore. Well, I'm not a scientist. If I was a scientist, I'd be looking for a cure to COVID-19. But I think most scientists are saying that that's probably the way a person was born, and they can't change. Now, I know not everybody would agree with that. If they just tried hard enough or pray hard enough, they would change. And my experience is, and I'm an old man, is, many of my friends who are gay would say, I knew when I was 10 that I was different than the other kids. I just knew that. And in northeastern Pennsylvania, where the gay population is not a huge portion of the population, it is not easy to come out and say you're a gay person. That must be very difficult. And all the more reason then for us to be compassionate to that, instead of twisting their arm to change or judging them, to try to say, how can I help you find peace within yourself, peace with God, peace with the church, and walk with them. And it may be a long walk, it may be a marathon. But the church, I encourage that gay person to find a church where they would feel welcome. They don't have to carry a placard and saying, I'm gay. Maybe work that out with the priest one-on-one, say, Father, here's, just so you know, or whatever. That's what the sacrament of confession is for. That person is struggling. And any priest worth his salt will help that person. And if nothing else comes out of this little program tonight, that person knows that your church has something for you. I hear people say, your church has nothing for me. That's not true. We may not have everything you want, but we can certainly have something and a place for you, a pew for you. And we need to work hard at that, maybe harder than we have. But this little program tonight is just an effort to take a first step. Yes?
Just a hitchhike on that. I think it needs to be said loudly and clearly. Father Dan already referred to it. If you are baptized, you have a right to be in the Catholic Church. If you have a desire to get to know Christ and to discover who he is, you have a right to come and visit us and to be present among us and seek what we have that we can teach you. And I know that there are certain clergy, there are certain parishes that will not treat you appropriately and welcomingly, and they're simply wrong. They're not following the gospel in their attitude if that's the way they're treating people. I can't change them either. But you have the right to say, if I cannot belong here in this local church, that does not mean that I do not belong to the Catholic community, and I will look for a place that will receive me.
Thank you. Dan, any closing comments, please?
I'd love to say just a couple of closing things. First of all, I'm very grateful to be with the two of you and to have this conversation. I want to say too, as it sounds like is true for both of you, I have been humbled by conversations that I have had with members of the LGBTQ community who want to live a Catholic life, right? There's seriousness of faith, there's seriousness of purpose, and really trying to figure it out. That integrity of quest is something that has affected me humanly and challenged me, both in terms of my own personal life and my priesthood. And I want to say that because I'm very grateful for the conversations I've had over the years with people who identify with one of those letters in that phrase, because I think I have been evangelized and I want to be more evangelized. The second closing comment I would just offer is the language in the Catechism of self-mastery, which doesn't really speak to our generation, but it is a helpful term. Right? All of us are in the process of becoming more virtuous. And maybe you're not as strong in the area of temperance, but you are strong in the area of justice, right? Maybe you're a wise person, but you lack courage, right? We're all on this journey to become more virtuous, right? And we all need more Christ in our lives. And I would say that for me is the real invitation of this moment for our parishes and our churches, for priests, and anybody who's leaving church today, is how do we help people in a culture that is not really focused on virtue and self-mastery, right? I mean, that's the bigger thing here. And for our parishes to become lively places of human formation. I think we would all be better if our churches took that turn. And I do think that is what Pope Francis has been inviting us to consider by stepping out of the way we've always done it, quote unquote, and dare to be evangelized by people who maybe don't feel like they belong in the church today. So I think he's offered a really important challenge, and it's something that I think it's wise for us to just meditate upon as a church.
I hope all of us take what information was thrown out here tonight. There's been a lot thrown out, and pray over it tonight and tomorrow and next week, and maybe read a little bit more about the issue from respected Catholic theologians instead of jumping to quick conclusions that are often hurtful and exclusionary rather than welcoming. We gave an article at Mary Mother God Parish a week ago entitled "LGBTQ Ministry is for the Good of All," says Father Brian Massingale. It was in U.S. Catholic, August 6, 2020, just 2 months ago. And it talks about how the LGBTQ person can evangelize us, as Father was talking about. It's just only a page and a half. It'll take you 10 minutes to read it, but it's a very good article. And we hope and pray that all of us work hard to make our parishes more welcoming. A month ago, it was the divorced and remarried person, and we have a lot of work to do in that, and we're doing it, and we're trying to do more and do better. A month from now, on the 10th of November, we'll have a panel here discussing women who've had abortions and feel unworthy, unloved, dirty. I don't know what word I can use there. That they don't feel they are welcome in church because they had an abortion. And we'll have two excellent people here with me. One is a lay woman and one is a brother priest of the Diocese of Scranton, who will try to help those people get over that issue and know they are loved and how to do that. Programs that are available in the church. And that'll be on November 10th. It's the Tuesday after the election. I think we'll all be happy when the election is over. I'll be happy not to have to watch any more political advertisements, especially early in the morning. I see enough of them. So I thank our producers who are behind this set. You don't see them. And we did have a little technical flaw getting started, but those things happen. I am not a technical person. I'm the last on the earth to do tech. You could have thanked my brother priest. Brother Dan lives in Wilkes-Barre. He came a long way to be here. And but he is the theologian, and Brother John Michael has spent his life doing retreats and college work, and I'm just a parish priest. So hopefully we've had something for everybody. Call your parish if you have any issues. How can I feel more welcome? How can I feel welcomed? And what can I offer my gifts and talents to the church in my journey of faith and coming my life together? So thank you very much, everybody, for participating. Have a good evening, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.